There is a forest somewhere in the mountains of Thailand. On the underside of a leaf, 8 meters above the ground, an ant clamps its jaws around the central vein and holds on. It didn't choose this spot. Something chose it. 20 days earlier, this ant was healthy, foraging, following scent trails, contributing to its colony the way ants do. Then a spore landed on its body, invisible, weightless, devastating. What followed is one of the most extraordinary and disturbing sequences in all of nature. The fungus didn't just infect the ant, it steered it. It hijacked the chemistry of its body, overrode millions of years of instinct, and redirected the ant to a specific location at a specific height above the ground at a specific time of day. Then it killed it. And then it burst out of the ant's head. This is not a movie. This is not a thought experiment. This is happening right now in forests on every inhabited continent on Earth. The organism responsible has been pulling this off for at least 48 million years. We have the fossil evidence. Its name is Cordyceps, and it is far stranger than anything The Last of Us ever showed you. Most people first encountered Cordyceps through a television screen, either through the BBC's Planet Earth in 2006, where David Attenborough's narration made it famous worldwide, or through HBO's The Last of Us in 2023, where the premise of a mind-controlling fungus drove the horror of an entire civilization's collapse. The show's creators built their fiction on a real foundation, and they were careful to acknowledge it. Because the truth about Cordyceps is already horrifying enough. There are over 600 known species of Cordyceps fungi. Collectively, they parasitise insects and arthropods across the globe. They have been found in amber fossils dating back 48 million years, already showing the same mind-control behavior we observe today. That means long before humans walked the earth, long before the dinosaurs went extinct, a fungus had already figured out how to use other living things as puppets. And yet, for all its horror movie qualities, Cordyceps is also a legitimate subject of scientific fascination, a pharmaceutical research target, and in East Asian traditional medicine, a substance prized for over 1,000 years. The story of Cordyceps is not simply a story about nature being terrifying. It is a story about the extraordinary complexity of biological relationships, about evolution producing outcomes that seem to defy imagination, and about how a kingdom of life most of us rarely think about, the fungi, operates by rules that feel genuinely alien. Let's start from the beginning. The kingdom fungi is one of the great underestimated empires of life on Earth. It is neither plant nor animal. Fungi don't photosynthesize. They don't chase prey. They decompose, digest, and absorb. They break down dead matter. They form partnerships with tree roots. They produce antibiotics. They ferment bread and beer and cheese. And in the case of certain species, they operate as sophisticated biological parasites. Cordyceps belongs to a group called the entomopathogenic fungi, meaning fungi that parasitize insects. This is not unusual on its own. Hundreds of fungal species target insects in some way. What makes Cordyceps remarkable is the precision. Different Cordyceps species target different hosts. Some attack beetles, others attack caterpillars, moths, wasps, flies, or cicadas. The species Ophiocordyceps sinensis, the most commercially valuable of the group, specifically targets ghost moth caterpillars in the Tibetan Plateau. Ophiocordyceps unilateralis, the species most studied for mind control, targets carpenter ants. Each Cordyceps species has co-evolved alongside its particular host over millions of years. The relationship is parasitic in the most literal sense. The fungus benefits completely. The host is destroyed. Here is how it works. A cordyceps spore lands on an ant. It adheres to the cuticle, the ant's outer shell, and begins to germinate. Specialized fungal filaments called hyphae penetrate the cuticle and enter the body. At this stage, the ant appears completely normal. It continues to forage, follow pheromone trails, and interact with nestmates. Nothing seems wrong. For roughly 2 to 3 weeks, the fungus grows inside the ant's body, but it does not immediately destroy the vital organs. Instead, it is doing something more deliberate. The fungus begins to produce a cocktail of chemical compounds, bioactive molecules that interact directly with the ant's nervous system. Research has identified several key compounds: guanidinobutyric acid, known to trigger seizures, compounds that inhibit neural function, and chemical signals that may disrupt the ant's own pheromone-based communication system. The result is behavioral manipulation. The infected ant begins to leave the colony. It abandons the pheromone trails ants normally follow with precision. Its movements become erratic, and then, critically, it starts to climb. What follows is known as summit disease. The infected ant climbs to a very precise height and locks its jaws around a leaf vein. Within hours, the ant is dead. Over the following days, the fungus consumes the ant's internal tissues and generates a fruiting body, a stalk called a stroma, that erupts from the back of the ant's head. At its tip, a capsule of spores develops. When conditions are right, those spores are released, falling onto the forest floor below, exactly where other foraging ants will walk through them. The cycle begins again. The question that has occupied researchers for decades is, how exactly does the fungus control the ant? For a long time, the assumption was logical. If you want to control behavior, you go for the control center. You invade the brain. But when researchers at Penn State University examined infected ants under the microscope in the early 2000s, what they found upended that assumption. The brain was intact. The fungus had not invaded the ant's brain tissue at all. Instead, the fungal cells had infiltrated the ant's muscle fibers throughout the body, the legs, the jaw. Fungal cells were found interspersed with muscle cells, connected by physical structures called high-fall bridges. The brain was physically untouched. If the brain is intact, who is in control? The researchers' conclusion was that the fungus appears to bypass the brain almost entirely. Rather than overriding the ant's neural commands, it may be generating its own commands directly at the muscular level, making the muscles move independently of the brain. The brain may not be driving the infected ant's behavior at all. The fungus itself may be doing the driving, using the ant's body as a mechanical vehicle. This is the kind of finding that stops biologists in their tracks, because if it holds up, and the evidence is growing, it means Cordyceps has achieved something extraordinary. It has not hacked the brain. It has made the brain irrelevant. David Hughes, the parasitologist who led much of this research, described it this way: the fungus is turning the ant into an extended part of itself. The ant becomes functionally an organ of the fungus, a mobile dispersal mechanism, an elevated platform for spore release, and the precision of that platform matters enormously. Studies on Ophiocordyceps unilateralis have found remarkable consistency in where ants die. They consistently bite down at very similar heights and very similar compass orientations. The conditions at that location, the humidity, the temperature, the airflow, are apparently optimal for fungal growth and spore dispersal. The fungus knows exactly where it needs the ant to go, and it makes the ant go there. The question of how the fungus knows this is not mystical. It is evolutionary. Over millions of generations, the fungal lineages that happen to produce behaviors leading their hosts to optimal spore release positions produced more offspring. Natural selection, blindly and patiently, sculpted the fungus's chemical toolkit until the manipulation was precise. There was never a plan, just selection. But knowing the evolutionary explanation does not make it less astonishing to witness or to think about. If you live in a tropical forest and you are an ant, Cordyceps is a genuine existential threat. Studies in Thai forests found that in some areas, infected ants were dying at a rate of several per square meter per day. The density of fruiting bodies could be extraordinary, and because the spores fall from exactly the height that foraging ants travel through, exposure is nearly unavoidable in an infected zone. But ants have evolved defenses, and those defenses are fascinating. Healthy ants can detect infected nestmates, not visually, but chemically. Infected ants produce subtle changes in their surface chemistry, likely a byproduct of the fungal invasion, and other ants respond to this signal. The response is brutal. They physically carry the infected ant away from the colony, sometimes over considerable distances, and abandon it far from the nest. This behavior, called social immunity, protects the colony by removing infectious individuals before they become spore-producing corpses inside the nest. Ants also appear to avoid areas where dead fungal infected ants are concentrated. Some researchers believe they can detect the chemical signature of what one might call a zombie graveyard and alter their foraging paths accordingly. But here is a layer to this story that almost never gets told. Cordyceps has its own parasite. There is a group of hyperparasitic fungi that specifically infect Cordyceps. Zombie killers that attack the Cordyceps fruiting body before it can produce spores, castrating the parasite and preventing the infection cycle from completing. In some field surveys, up to 60% of Cordyceps fruiting bodies were found to be hyperparasitized. This means that the horror story has its own villain, and that villain has a predator. It's fungi all the way down. This layering of parasite on host is a reminder that ecological systems are not simply predator and prey. They are webs of interdependence, competition, and suppression, nested inside each other, balancing each other in ways we are only beginning to understand. Now here is where things get genuinely strange, because Cordyceps is not only a terrifying parasite, it is also a valued medicine, a performance enhancer, and one of the most expensive natural commodities on Earth. Ophiocordyceps sinensis, known in Chinese as winter worm, summer grass, or dong chong xiao chow, has been used in traditional Tibetan and Chinese medicine for over 1,000 years. The name describes its appearance. In winter, it is a caterpillar, infected underground by the fungus. In summer, it becomes a grass, because the fruiting body emerges from the ground, resembling a thin blade of vegetation sprouting from the dead caterpillar below. Harvesters in the Tibetan Plateau and Himalayan foothills have spent centuries collecting these objects by hand, crawling across alpine meadows at elevations of 3,500 to 5,000 meters, searching for tiny brown stalks barely visible above the soil. The work is seasonal, backbreaking, and increasingly valuable. As of recent years, wild Ophiocordyceps sinensis has sold for prices exceeding $20,000 per kilogram, occasionally far higher for premium specimens. By weight, it has at various points been more expensive than gold. The global market for this single fungal species runs into billions of dollars annually. Traditional medicine attributes to it a wide range of benefits: improved energy, enhanced athletic performance, respiratory support, kidney strengthening, and immune modulation. For most of these claims, the scientific evidence remains incomplete, but not all of them. In 1993, a group of Chinese female athletes shattered 3 world records at the Chinese National Games, and their coach cited cordyceps. The performances were so far beyond previous records that accusations of doping flooded in. Drug tests were negative for banned substances. The coach attributed the results partly to a training regimen that included cordyceps supplements. The incident remains controversial. Some researchers believe the cordyceps claim was a deflection. Others believe the compound deserved serious investigation. Either way, the episode brought cordyceps to the attention of sports scientists worldwide. Subsequent laboratory research identified several bioactive compounds in Ophiocordyceps sinensis, most notably cordycepin, a nucleoside analog with demonstrated antifungal, antiviral, and anti-inflammatory properties in laboratory settings. Research into its interaction with adenosine receptors has provided a potential biological basis for the traditional energy claims. Clinical trials in humans remain limited, but the pharmacological interest is real and ongoing. In 2009, researchers examining 48-million-year-old amber fossils from the Messel Oil Shale Formation in Germany found something remarkable: a fossilized leaf with a bite mark. Not a caterpillar bite, not a mammal bite, a very specific, deeply incised bite mark on the main leaf vein, surrounded by fungal evidence. It was a zombie ant bite. The shape of the bite, its position on the leaf vein, and the presence of fungal structures all matched what we see in modern Ophiocordyceps infections with extraordinary accuracy, which means that 48 million years ago, an ant was infected by an ancestor of cordyceps, climbed vegetation, bit into a leaf vein with its jaw locked, and died in exactly the same way that ants are dying today. This is called behavioral fossilization, not the behavior itself. You can't fossilize a behavior, but the evidence of it, preserved in amber. And it tells us something profound. The cordyceps manipulation strategy has been functionally unchanged for nearly 50 million years. Natural selection has not substantially improved it because it does not need to be improved. It works with a precision that has held across geological time. For comparison, 48 million years ago, horses were the size of dogs. The ancestors of humans were small, tree-dwelling primates, and a fungus was already doing this. The world was almost unrecognizably different, and yet an ant in a European forest was dying in exactly the same way, from exactly the same kind of fungus, gripping a leaf at exactly the same position. That persistence should stop us. It speaks to a degree of evolutionary optimization that most biological systems never achieve. Cordyceps has been solving the same problem for 48 million years and keeps arriving at the same answer. The question everyone asks: can cordyceps infect humans? The honest, evidence-based answer is no, not in any meaningful sense, and the reasons why are instructive. Cordyceps species are host-specific. Ophiocordyceps unilateralis targets a particular genus of carpenter ant. The biochemical toolkit required to exploit an ant's nervous system is entirely different from what would be required to exploit a mammalian one. Human body temperature also plays a critical role. Most fungal pathogens cannot thrive at 37 degrees Celsius, the core temperature of healthy humans. This is actually one of the reasons we evolved to maintain such high internal temperatures in the first place, as a defense against fungal infection. The energy cost of being warm-blooded is partly justified by the antifungal protection it provides. The Last of Us addresses this directly in its fictional universe by proposing a scenario where climate change causes a cordyceps-like fungus to adapt to higher temperatures, a speculative extrapolation of a real concern. In reality, no known cordyceps species poses any threat to healthy humans. There are fungal pathogens that do affect humans: Candida, Aspergillus, Cryptococcus, and these deserve serious attention, particularly as antifungal resistance becomes an emerging public health issue. But they operate through entirely different mechanisms, and none involve behavioral manipulation. The writers of The Last of Us understood that the real biology of cordyceps is so extraordinary it requires almost no embellishment to be terrifying. They just needed to change the host. Here is what cordyceps actually teaches us, beneath all the horror. It teaches us that life does not optimize for the survival of individual organisms. It optimizes for the propagation of genetic information. The fungus does not hate the ant. It has no feelings about the ant at all. The ant is simply a resource, a vehicle, a platform, a mechanism for getting spores from one place to another. Everything about the ant, its behavior, its muscles, its instincts, its millions of years of evolution, has been captured and repurposed. This is not evil, but it is deeply, profoundly indifferent, and that indifference is perhaps more unsettling than malice would be. Cordyceps also challenges our assumptions about control. We tend to think of behavior as something that originates in the mind, in consciousness, in choice. The zombie ant challenges that. If a creature's muscles can be made to move without its brain issuing the commands, if its behavior can be steered without any engagement with whatever inner life it may have, then what is behavior really? Is it the output of a mind, or is it just chemistry? These are not abstract philosophical questions. They are live research areas, and cordyceps keeps showing up in the literature as a model system for understanding behavioral manipulation in ways that have implications far beyond entomology. And finally, cordyceps teaches us something about time. 48 million years is incomprehensible. The human species, in its current anatomical form, is perhaps 300,000 years old. Agriculture is 10,000 years old. Recorded history barely covers the last 5,000. Against that backdrop, the cordyceps manipulation strategy has been running, unchanged and successful, for 48 million years. Whatever we think we know about optimization and problem-solving, a fungus has been doing it longer, more consistently, and with more precision than anything humans have ever achieved. In a forest somewhere right now, an ant is climbing. It doesn't know why. It doesn't know that the chemical signals steering it belong not to itself, but to something growing inside it. It will reach a specific height, bite down on a specific surface, and die in a location chosen with extraordinary precision by an organism that has been perfecting this strategy since before our continent was in its current position. That ant's death will feed a fungus. That fungus will produce spores. Those spores will fall, and the cycle will continue as it has continued without interruption for 48 million years. The zombie fungus is real. It has been real far longer than we have existed to observe it, and it operates with a cold, absolute precision that no horror writer could improve upon, because it was already optimized by something more patient and more creative than human imagination. Evolutionary time. The next time you walk through a forest and spot a pale stalk emerging from the ground, growing upward from something small and still, look twice. Subscribe for more stories about the hidden forces shaping the living world.